us spent a good portion of last evening going through those like line by line. In fact, what I'm going to ask him to do, and I haven't talked to him about it yet, is actually to put that in a format that we can then send to Connie, which is you did a phenomenal job. It's a really good checklist. I've been spending most of my time on the policy side, and I'll tell you what Gov and some other people have said about some of the policy issues surrounding that. But Cody put together a really good checklist, and I think it'd be a great little resource for you guys, because I'm going to guess a lot of the members aren't going to read all 40 pages of stuff that came out yesterday. So I'm going to go through the forms for June, because they're coming out in a couple of weeks and not many. I'm going to go through the COVID forms that came out yesterday, including best practices and the BPP, which is the best practices prevention plan. We're going to talk about the actual forms themselves, a couple of tips, and then, of course, answer questions. We want to hold at least a half hour for questions. So that's kind of what my plan is, if that sounds good to everybody. If it doesn't, put your thumb up and don't like that. Otherwise, Vanessa already said thumbs up, so we're good. I'm leaving that one alone. I can't look at everybody, so okay. So Deborah said good, so that's 2 out of 76. I'm in. 2 out of 99. I'm sorry. I really miss you guys. I got to say, I think all of us, all joking aside, the one thing we really miss is human contact. I know I miss coming into the office and joking around with you people. I don't miss wearing pants, however. That's the cool part of all this. Is I don't know about Cody, but I haven't worn long pants since sometime in early March. So this part of it's kind of fun.
I bought $100 of swimsuits about a month ago, so that's
Did you?
Pretty much my.
Anyway, for those of you that are already online, this is Cody Bellmeyer. Cody is a relatively new lawyer. I guess you're getting close to your 1-year anniversary, but and don't take this the wrong way, because I don't like you that much, but probably the finest young lawyer I've ever worked with in my 43 years of practice. And he and I are working together because somebody told me that this beard that I have growing is not blonde. It's actually very, very gray. And so there will come a time where I won't be the person that you're going to be looking to. And so he and I have kind of formed a pact so that over the next couple of years, as he gets ready to step into my shoes, and he's got much bigger feet than I do, he'll be taken over. So that's kind of what's going on. So we're okay with that? So when we get started in about 5 minutes, that's what we'll do. Is that okay? Daniel, do you need anything from me? Okay. And the way we're going to handle questions is, what I'd like to do is, rather than wait, we can do it one of two ways. As each section, as we sort of come to a conclusion on each of the sections, go ahead and ask questions then. On the forums, just remember, we got these yesterday. So there may be some questions that Cody will have to write down, and we'll have to do a follow-up to Connie that will, address some of the questions we may not be able to answer today. But I think, frankly, while you may not like some of the answers you're going to get today, I think pretty much we're pretty much on target now as to what we're going to be doing. So let's see who else is online here. There's Connie. There's Adam Ruiz. Wow, this is a big meeting. Cambria, how are you, young lady? I just got an email from Erica. By the way, she said to say hi.
Oh, give her my love. Thank you.
I will do that. We just got our Hawaii trip canceled, so we're all kind of bummed about that.
We were supposed to be there yesterday.
Oh, isn't that a bummer? I know. No sense in going. You got to stay in your room for 2 weeks.
Right?
So anyway, it is what it is. Guess we can all complain about it, but a lot of the churches are going to be opening up this weekend. That's I guess good for a lot of people. I know our church is opening up week after next on June 7th, so we'll see how that works out. And I guess a lot of the restaurants, right, Adam? A lot of the restaurants in Temecula are starting to open back up again. So that's a good thing.
Starting to see a lot of restaurants open. The mall opened up and had a pretty good showing of stores that are opening up as well.
Well, that's good. I know the Stampede will be closed for a while longer, but we're hoping to be able to open up by August the 1st. We'll see. It is what it is, right? So there's not much we can do about it. We could open up based on the Temecula and Riverside orders, but then the ABC will strip us of our liquor license because the governor is telling us we can't open up. So anyway, let's see here. It is 11:27. So Daniel, we about ready to go? Are you letting people in? So we're at 158 right now. So I want to get, what I'm going to do is I want to start with the new forms that are coming out in June. They're not that big a deal, and then we'll go from there into the big forms that came out yesterday. So I thought I had this organized. Here we go. Okay. All right. And by the way, again, for those of you that, if you're a broker and you have a question for the whole brokerage, let me know that. I know Joe is, runs his organization, and let me know who amongst you is, because we're going to try to split this up between both what the broker needs to do for his or her company, and then of course what the agents need to do and how the broker needs to supervise this. But I know I've been dealing with some of my brokerages that I personally represent, and we're trying to put together the best case scenario for how you deal with these some of these issues. So we'll kind of share some of that with you guys today as we start moving forward. Cody and I have become glorified librarians, man. We got so much information that it's getting, I'm sure all of you are in the same boat. If you're keeping up, you're reading every day, right? And so it's just been unbelievable. So you said you doubled your package size, Joe, pretty much?
Yeah, well, if you add in the forms that they gave us yesterday and all the duplicate PEDs and everything else that's being provided, yeah, you're probably using twice as much paper if you were still in a paper environment.
Well, and you got to be really careful because, like, when we get to the PEAD, you got to make sure you use the right one now, because now they're, instead of the one PEAD, they've replaced that and have indicated you cannot use that old PEAD. You've got to use the one specific to your transaction and your situation. So
14 as of yesterday.
Yeah, there's 4 now, and so we'll go over them briefly for those people that haven't had a chance to go onto the website. But
yeah,
and the good news is that they've actually developed the prevention plan for you. So all you really need to do is read it. It's about 10 pages long, and modify it to your uses. I think the big issue, well, I'm going to talk about it when I get, I don't want to, I'm going to start. Because 11:30, and unlike most of the time where we give, realtors a couple of minutes to, I don't want to just see myself. Can you put me back to the gallery? How do I do that? I want to see everybody. Somehow I just got switched to just looking at myself. Daniel, if you can you switch me back to the gallery or whatever it's called? If you can do that. Anyway. All right, so good morning, everybody. As most of you know, my name is John Giradinelli. I am a legal counsel to the Southwest Riverside County Association of Realtors, and also to a number of other associations. And you were my first and always my home board, I guess, for want of a better term. I am broadcasting from beautiful Canyon Lake, California. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over some forms, and then we're going to talk about some landlord-tenant issues, and then we're going to talk about some general stuff. If I don't cover what you came to talk about, we're going to spend about a half hour, hopefully at the end, just answering questions. So I know that Sylvia Lima sent me over some questions that have already come in. I've got about 5 or 6 of them, really good, solid questions, and so we'll do the best that we can. So what's coming up in June? Again, June 24th, you're going to be getting 2 new forms. These are, as you know, in every June and every December, you guys get new and revised forms. Typically, that's what they do. Been a lot different these last couple of months because of the pandemic situation and their need to come up with both new forms and then to revise those forms as the pandemic sort of played itself out. But on June 24th, you're going to get your regular batch of new and revised forms. So real quickly in going over them, the two new forms, one is, it's actually timely. It's called a property visit and open house advisory. And it's a form that you could be handing out to both sides, and it's simply an advisory that will tell people some information about open houses. Number one, warn them that sometimes on a property you're going to have recording devices, whether audio and or visual, and that they need to be aware of that. You know, there's certain issues there with people being able to see you and hear you and all that. There's also going to be a section dealing with the dangerous conditions on the property, those kinds of questions, what to do about children and discouraging you from bringing children to open houses, particularly today, but just in general, and then some general other information. So it's a pretty good form about safety issues and about some privacy issues, and it comes out again on June 24th. Along with that is a form Cody and I have had our concerns about. One is it's called the Square Foot and Lot Size Advisory. Oftentimes, people are concerned about, how did you arrive at the approximate square footage that you're putting in the MLS? And so this form will allow you to give it to the seller, and the seller can then, through the matrix that's going to be part of the form, will be able to calculate how they arrived at the square footage that they've advised you about. The public issues, whether it's been taped by an appraiser or by somebody else, all of the different ways. And so there's going to be a matrix. I'm still ambivalent about the form because even though you're not doing it, it's going to need to be made very clear that all you're doing is passing this form on from the seller to the buyer, and that it's not any representation you are making. So what we're going to do is before June 24th, we haven't been doing the courtside newsletter because we've been writing so many other things, but we're going to do a courtside newsletter specific to the forms coming out in June. And we'll go over these two forms in a little more detail. Then there's going to be a bunch of changes of current forms. Most of the changes on the landlord-tenant side, the notice of change in terms of tenancy, the notice to quit, the notice of termination of tenancy, the notice to perform or cure, are all going to be revised to take into account the new tenant protection / rent control law. So because they've added a lot of ways you can kick a tenant out for failure to perform certain tasks, aside from payment of rent, they're gonna clarify all that in the new forms. And so for those of you that do property management and or have properties that you manage or are asked questions, there'll be updated forms. These forms already exist, but they'll be updated. They're also going to update one form, which is a form I'm hoping you all have become familiar with, which is the Disclosure Information Advisory. That's the form that you should give to all of your sellers that advises them. It came from CAR legal staff that advises them how to fill out their TDS and their SPQ. Well, there's going to be a change to the TDS it's a very, very minor change, but it has some important implications. The minor change to the TDS is under those boxes that talk about other disclosure, supplemental disclosures, and substituted disclosures you're doing. At the very top up in section 1, they're going to add a little line saying no substituted disclosures. And then the information sheet, which is going to have a new paragraph, will explain to the seller what all that means. So as they're filling out their TDS for you, they'll have that form in front of them, which hopefully you will give them at the earliest possible opportunity, and they'll be able to fill out the form a little bit better. They're going to make some minor changes to the representative capacity form. They're going to change your exclusive listing agreement effective on June 24th and add a section that goes through and clarifies the new clear cooperation policies that have been implemented at CRMLS and all the other MLSs, so that now you have that coming soon status and you have a registered status. And there's some other rule changes that have taken place. And so they're going to put that in your listing agreement. So as you go through the listing agreement with your potential seller, you'll be able to have something to prompt you to talk about what clear cooperation means and what you have to do if they want to hold the property for a period of time. Then for those of you that sell property out in the rural areas, Sage and Wonga and all that, they're going to substantially modify the septic inspection advisory. So they're going to put a lot more emphasis on the fact that there are certifications for wells and certifications for all of that available. And so that is going to be coming out as well. And of course, as I mentioned, they're going to be modifying the real estate disclosure form. So those are the forms that are coming out in June, on June 24th, actually, according to CAR. And so that's happening now. Any questions about any of that before we move on to the next group? Hearing now, by the way, rather than raising your hands, just go into the section for Q&A, and Cody and Daniel will monitor that, or Connie, I'm not sure who, and let me know when there's questions, so that we don't have everybody jumping on board at the same time. Now, let's talk about, well, one other thing on forms. Some of you probably don't know yet. Most of you probably already do. There was a plan to completely revise the residential purchase agreement and come out with a brand new 16-page RPA in December. That has been shelved, and although the RPA as it was going to be issued has actually been revised eight different times, they've decided that to take a little bit off your plate, they're going to push that back until December of 2021. So the RPA you're using today is actually going to remain in effect until December of 2021, and then it will be replaced by a brand new form. So we'll have all of next year to talk about those changes that will come up. So let's talk about forms that came out yesterday. How many of you have had a chance to look at those forms yet? Anybody? Yeah. Okay. So Joni, you have, and Esperanza and a couple of others, I'm sure. So I know Cody and I have, and they're really pretty good, actually. I've lucky for me and lucky for everyone else, I guess, is I did a program with Gov yesterday, so I was able to ask him some questions at that seminar about these forms. The biggest single issue, what you need to understand is a couple of things. Let's go to some basics. Number one is these best practices that they've come up with, and these entry forms that you're supposed to put at the entrance to the properties and all these other things are simply CAR's service to you of what the state has ordered in terms of reopening on the real estate side. So don't be blaming CAR for things you don't like about it, because they don't like some of it either, okay? So that's number one, is that these really are state-mandated best practices, and then some recommendations from the CAR attorneys on what that might look like. Secondly, is the one thing CAR is lobbying for and pushing back on, and I know Gino's probably working on it, and I know good Mr. Wilson is probably working on it, maybe Adam, I don't know if you are, is pushing back on one of the rules that came out of the state order, which is that the real estate listing office is ultimately responsible for making sure that the property is disinfected after every single showing, right? So the way it's working and what the rules say, and I think it's dumb, you probably think it's dumb, but what they've said, and again, these are the rules, which means if you don't follow them and somebody gets sick, you know, there's potential for some problems down the line. But what they're basically saying is that before you show the property, however that showing is going to take place physically, not virtually, obviously, but physically, you've got to disinfect the property in accordance with the best practices. That means wiping that. It doesn't have to physically be you, but you are ultimately responsible to make sure it gets done. And how you do that, that's what we can talk about that a little bit if you'd like. But number one, that means you got to open all doors. Open the windows if you can. Turn on anything that someone would normally touch, open up. Number one. Number two, disinfect banisters and disinfect toilets, and kind of disgusting. And I don't think, oops, excuse me. I don't think that was originally in your job. I don't think that was part of the DRE test as to how to disinfect the toilet. So That is now something you're required to do. And you're required to do that before every showing. Then you're required to make sure that after every showing that you do it again. Now, a couple of things on that. I talked to Gov about it. Gov Hutchinson, by the way, is the attorney that runs your hotline at CAR. An absolutely brilliant lawyer and a great speaker, by the way, if you ever get a chance to hear him talk. And I asked him, okay, does that mean that the realtor, him or herself, has to actually do that? And the answer is no. Your job is so you can delegate that. You're going to be ultimately responsible, just like a lawyer would be ultimately responsible for their paralegal or their secretary or their assistant. You're going to be responsible for whoever you hire, so you could use an unlicensed assistant, an intern, another company. There's people that you could use to do this for you, but you're going to have to document that. I was joking with Gov yesterday. Does that mean, like when you go to a restaurant and see on the bathroom door, the people that have washed and cleaned the bathroom and then they initial? You have to do something. We're going to try and come up, Cody and I are going to put our heads together and try to come up with a form that I'm going to send over to Connie that, hopefully can be used. But the bottom line is, however you do it, you're going to need to do that every single time you physically show the property. That means it's going to be even more important, in my opinion, that when you do show properties, you only show them to serious buyers. Because if you just open the doors and let everybody come in, number one, that's probably a violation of the best practices, but also you're making a lot more work for yourself. And by showing it to quote unquote serious buyers,
John,
you
have a couple of questions.
All right, well, I'll shut up and hear what the questions are. What are they?
Okay, they're to do with what you're talking about.
Okay.
Who's responsible for disinfecting, the buyer agent or the listing agent?
Listing agent is ultimately responsible. The buyer's agent can do it. The buyer can do it. The seller can do it. One of your, if you hire a company to come in and do it, it doesn't have to, you don't physically have to do it. In fact, it's going to be impossible. I'm going to guess sometimes some of you don't even go to all the showings. You have other people do that for you. So that's not the issue. You can have, but you've got to make sure it gets done. That's the part CAR is trying to get changed, because it's really, in my view, and I think Cody agrees with me, it's an almost impossible standard. And so from that standpoint, CAR is lobbying strongly with people like Adam and Walter and Gino's help to try and get that changed to a more reasonable standard. But if you look at the PEAD forms, there are provisions in there now to sort of make it clear that ultimately the sellers should be making sure all this happens. But we got a call yesterday. What happens if the seller's letting people come in and you don't even know about it? So it really is a difficult standard. I understand that, and we're going to hopefully, before this all ends and we start seeing lawsuits filed sometime in the fall, this will get cleared up, because but this is what happens. Okay, I'm a guest today, so I'm trying not to make too many political comments, but this is what happens when people who don't engage in the business write regulations for that business, because they don't understand your business. They're not realtors. They're not out there in the trenches dealing with all these issues, but they're writing regulations for you. Most of these regulations came primarily from OSHA, which is always knee-deep in very complicated regulations. So anyway, that's something that you need to be aware of, is this whole concept of ultimate responsibility. So as we walk through these new forms, hopefully you'll see that where they play out. And then what we're going to do.
Okay, one more question. It's a combined question.
Okay.
Does this apply? Cleaning the house apply for appraisers and home inspectors?
Everyone.
Yes.
The answer is yes.
Perfect.
I'm going to go through that when I go through the best practices. And then what we're going to do is, if it's okay with Cody, and hopefully it will be, because I'll tell him to do it, he wrote out this tremendous checklist that I went through this morning. And what I would like to be able to do is just give it to Connie to post however she thinks is appropriate. Because what he did is he literally took it line by line and then summarized it. So that gives you, it's not a substitute for reading them through at least once or twice, but at least you'll have something in front of you that's a couple of pages long that'll give you a pretty good idea of sort of a cheat sheet of how to do this. So let's go through the new forms. And remember, disclaimer, these came out yesterday, right? And so I looked at them yesterday morning and then again last night. But again, there were lots of other things going on, as you can imagine, in our world right now. And so I don't feel like I have the greatest handle on all of them, but I think that you'll get the flavor. So let's talk about, I'm going to tell you what the new forms are that came out yesterday in case you haven't had a chance to look, and then we'll talk about them individually. First of all, it's not technically a form, it is a new best practices guideline and a prevention plan for showing. So bottom line is brokerages, you need to develop a best practices prevention plan. You have to have one for your office. You have to then give it to each agent who then will, just like you do with your policy manuals and all the other things you have, each agent will then need to acknowledge that they've read and understood.
It's working so well that my lending partner,
with that, because it's part of your supervisorial
basically
responsibilities.
has
as long
said,
as you
here's
do
my
that,
business
you
credit
should
card.
be okay. And what
Let's get as
CAR
many
has
of
done
these
for
people
you
in the pipeline as
is
possible.
in these best practices,
Not only just
they have
in our
created
local target
a
area,
prevention plan.
but he's also licensed in Florida.
Again,
He's
be
licensed
careful
in
about
all of
modifying that
Pennsylvania.
too much. It's not the time
He
to
has
get lazy.
a reciprocal
I
license in
understand
New
that
Jersey,
this is a lot of work.
and he wants to go
lot of
nuts
work.
with it.
There's no arguing
because
about that.
He's never, he tells
Cody
me
and I were
virtually
joking
every
the
time
other
we
day,
talk
is
about
it,
it.
is
He's
it less
never
work
seen
than if you have
anything
to
like
sit
it.
down and answer a bunch of interrogatories or
you know,
deal with a
basically
mediation
giving me
or
a
an
blank check, like,
arbitration,
hey,
or earn the money to
as
pay
much
for
of
your
this
deductible? No.
into the
So
pipeline.
you're just going to
as
have to
humanly
slow it
possible.
down a little bit, and then you're going to have to make sure that,
How are
as
you building your
brokers,
funnel?
you adopt
So the,
this prevention plan.
The
So take a look at the
survey
one that's on CAR's.
we're using
that you have
Survey
on your Zippy
Gizmo.
Form program.
We've tested a couple of different things.
The B,
someone that we've kind of been that has been a mentor with some of this for us is your recommended Survey Gizmo. It's
and that
not
form
cheap.
has got all the best practices. I'm going to walk through some of them right now.
But that's what we found to work best.
Points to a
Survey Gizmo. There are other options, but here's the thing, and I keep belaboring this point because it's worth belaboring.
That you can then have everyone sign.
Any one little piece of this,
monitor it.
If you don't have it optimized properly,
make sure you understand
the whole thing can blow up. I can't tell you how much time and effort, especially Jeff has spent testing and tweaking and making little changes here or there to the audience selection, to how we're walking people through the quiz, to all of those things. Every one of those little bits is a tiny hinge that can swing the big door of results. Okay, so what I'm going to say here is, if you're interested, we are building this out for clients.
And it is a form,
and we start on a trial basis. In order to enter this property, and then after the trial,
wash your hands, we can sign a declaration.
We have a debriefing,
that you don't
and there are
the
several ways,
or any of
several
the
options,
symptoms,
or
and
ways
all of
that
those
we can
kinds of
proceed
things.
if we like, or we
download
can
that form, and there's
Either
a couple
one
of them.
Is fine.
They're both real good.
But
They're
I wanted
both the
to at
same.
least
one just
show
looks
you
a little
this,
different, and you just put it on your and you're listening.
What's
so
possible?
You got to do that for your properties that are for rent. So that's that
like
form,
and
again, I'll go through it a little more detail. Then we have a coronavirus property entry advisory and declaration.
But it really is now.
For sellers and occupants, so it's the PEAD.
That real estate,
most of you are familiar that we've had a PEAD form, which is the property declaration, property entry advisory and declaration. That form has now been replaced, so don't use it anymore. It has been replaced by a more specific form.
45-60 days to get the
so one, if you're asking the seller as part of the package,
solve the problem
of
knowing
when you look at your document, the PEAD actually does attach to it.
Now, those exact numbers are going to vary by market.
So, in other words, when you
so I can't
provide this to your
for sure in your market, it's going to be
online
for every $300 we spend on ads,
it will
it's going to produce you
automatically the best practices, so they can read themselves
or
what
whatever.
you have been instructed to do, so that they can understand you're not lying to them, and so that form is available, and that's a form you would have your seller sign and or the occupant if it's somebody other than the seller. Then there's the coronavirus lease rental property entry advisory and that is for owner occupant. And again, that's a form that can be used for people that are in possession of the property. That could be a tenant, for example. So you could use the seller occupant or the owner occupant, and that's for the tenants. Again, it's for people that are in possession. Then there's the Corona. There's the Corona Property Entry Advisory for visitors. That would be a form that you would use for people that are just visiting the property. It could be an inspector. Somebody asked before about inspectors. It could be an appraiser. Okay, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how you get those people to do it, because I had a conversation with the people from CREIA, which is the inspection certification company, and I'll tell you what they said. So we'll do that in a second. Actually, let me just do it now, because I'll probably forget. Their problem, I heard at the beginning of all this, they weren't willing to sign the PEAD, and maybe some of you have had that experience where your inspector wasn't willing to sign a PEAD. And some people even said, and CREIA is telling them not to do it, and that's not true. What they're concerned about, particularly because a lot of these people in today, because you have a brand new form, they haven't seen the form. They're not members of CAR, so they don't get it automatically. It's not part of any service or program they have. So what you need to do is get it to them ahead of time so that they can read it over and understand it, get it signed ahead of time. In talking to Ed Zorn, there's a number of ways you can do that on your multiple listing service. You can put it in agent remarks. You can put it in in some of the other places that you guys are all familiar with. I'm not. But whatever you do, you got to get it to the appraiser. You got to get it to the inspector, or any repair people, whoever's going to visit the property. This is a very important form, and it has to be done every single time. So if you're going to be running around with a buyer and looking at 4 or 5 houses, you're going to need 4 or 5 PEAD forms to deal with that. You guys got that? I know it's a lot of work. You can pre-prepare them, but you have to put the property address for each. If you look at when you see the form, you'll see it's got a property address, location. You're going to want to have signatures for each one of those. And then, so again, we have 3 PAD forms, and what CAR has said is you may not use the old form. These 3 forms replace the PEAD. Okay, so you've got the PAD-S for sellers, the PAD-LR primarily for occupants such as tenants, and then you have the PEAD-V, which is for visitors. So and that's the most important one. So again, any questions about the PEAD? I'm going to go through some specifics about it, but that's going to happen. Those are the PEAD forms. And here's the deal. While the legislature and or the regulators and or the governor have not said that this particular form is mandatory, a form is mandatory, and you might as well use the one that CAR drafted for you, because their lawyers walked through these rules and wrote these forms specifically to comply with the requirements that have been imposed on you by the state. Okay, so it seems to me that rather than mess around and try and play games, CAR is willing to stand behind their material, and if you use their form and something goes wrong, you're going to have the protections of a very large organization. Any comments about the PEAD other than yes, Joanne, I see your hand go up.
Yeah. So on PEADS, on number 3, it says, no written materials or brochures describing, advertising, or marketing the property can be available on the property. Now, someone might come along and try to interpret that as no signage. That's not what we're talking about, though, right?
That's correct. That's a great point. That's a great question. As you probably already know, again, a lot of this stuff is connecting the dots, and we don't have time today to connect all the dots. But CAR has already said you should not have advertising material that you hand out. In other words, flyers, brochures, on-site stuff, everything should be put online. And then I can go and electronically download it myself. in order to not have touching it. And again, whether you think these are overreaching, and it doesn't really matter, it's the law, and our job is to give you the best approach conservatively to what the law says. So yes, to answer your question, it does not mean signs. Signs have been clearly, and we're going to talk about signs in a little while. I'm actually doing a program tomorrow specifically about signs. But what I want to emphasize to you is that this is stuff that you would sometimes, if you go into an open, I know I've been in a lot of open houses in Tennessee recently, and there's always some kind of a brochure. Usually it's the brochure that you could put in a kiosk if you had a kiosk, and I understand that, but that stuff is not to be done right now. No door knockers, no flyers, none of that stuff, because it allegedly exchanges potentially the virus. So we'll go over that in a little more detail. Now, there is a listing agreement coronavirus addendum, and that is a form that will, again, it's pre-checked for the PEADS and the BPPP, so that as part of your listing process, for any new listings on a go forward, or if you want to go back, which you should, and sit down with your sellers and say, look, we've got some new rules and we all need to comply, because they do too. These aren't just rules for you. They've already attached to that listing addendum the S form, the PEADS, so the seller can sign it and you can keep it in your file. And if any buyer agents want to see it, they can, which then is a representation that no one in the house has any of the symptoms or has been sick or any of that stuff. And then it also has for the seller to review so that they understand what you're trying to do for them, the BPPP, which is the best practices prevention plan document, which we talked about before. So that form is available to you now. And then lastly is, because there's, and we're going to talk about this in depth, so I'd like you to hold any questions about this particular form. Cody and I will talk about a phone conversation we had last week, but the coronavirus rent payment delay and repayment agreement. And those of you that do, and I don't know how many property managers we have on, but about half of the calls Cody and I get are related to rentals, which makes perfect sense since half the properties in California now are rental properties. And so there's going to be some very specific ways that you will pay back or arrange for payback of past due rentals. And so again, this is the best practices. I don't know if you can see it very well, probably not. That's the best practices guidelines. It is a 10-page form. This is the all persons entering. It's simply a one-page document that you slap onto the front door. Or if you would prefer, you can use this one, which is a little more colorful. I like the first one because it's just a little clearer. It's not in a little more thorough. There is a form that you can also download, which is the actual prevention plan itself. It's about 10 pages long, about 9.5 pages long, and just a really good form. And then you can click on and attach, if you're really interested in all this and why CAR is doing this, the COVID industry guidance form that was published by Cal OSHA, and that form is the form. This particular booklet is what everything else has been based on. So for those of you that want to do a deeper dive, you can do that. In talking about best practices 201, let me just sort of run through some stuff off of Cody's checklist, which I thought was really good. Again, I want to make sure you guys are aware, these are not recommendations. These are instructions, okay? This isn't something, well, you could use this or you should do that. These are instructions to you that may or may not ever be a problem, but if you get into some trouble down the line and the plaintiff's lawyers start going through your deposition and asking you, well, did you do this and did you do that? They're going to take it straight off of these best practices. And if you answer no to any of these questions, it's going to be a difficult process for you if there can be a connection to whatever injury is being alleged. So, yeah, go ahead. Go to you. Something to say?
Really briefly, we're getting a lot of questions about the PEAD on the side. Before we move on too much past that, I wanted to just drop one or two that I think we can combine.
Okay, go ahead.
Generally, and I know we talked about this with Gov yesterday, first, how do you deliver these things to the seller? And do you think there's a time frame in which you need to deliver them to the seller? And then do they need to be acknowledged by the seller? And I know we've discussed both of those internally and even with Gov. So
no. So first question, they need to be delivered before entry to the property. So technically, I suppose you can bring them with you. I did a transaction a couple of weeks ago, and I thought the agent, some difficulty with the transaction, but what the agent did is she had a package that she forwarded to the buyer's agent ahead of time and said, bring these with you, sign them, and all of that. I thought that was a great way to do it. But again, if they show up and you know, you've got other things to do, you want to show them the property, you may have another group of people coming in, and you know, you're trying to pace all that, particularly if people come in late and the appointments start getting bunched. You want to have as little to do relative to this kind of stuff as possible when they show up, so you can get that stuff ahead of time. Remember, Article 3 of the Code of Ethics says you are to cooperate with each other, right? And more than ever, Article 3 is an article that we're monitoring through the professional standards, because I think that's going to be a big issue if some agents decide to act like jerks and not cooperate. So that's one. As far as it being acknowledged, it should be. It is not legally required. It doesn't say so in the BPP, but obviously, if you want to prove that somebody got something, you want to acknowledge it. But again, you need to store it, keep it in your file. It's going to be more storage. You're going to do a lot of this by DocuSign, so just going to be a digital storage. Was there another question, Cody?
Yeah,
that I can answer right now?
A follow-up to that, if you will, is I'm trying to make sure I don't have to combine multiple. So obviously you'd want to use them for anyone entering the property, like an HVAC company or anyone going in to do repairs as well. And this one's interesting. It came up a few times. If they already have an old form signed, do they need to replace it with a new one?
No, that came up actually yesterday.
Yep.
And all three lawyers, Gov, myself, and Ed Zorn, who's a phenomenal lawyer in his own right, all said exactly the same thing. It's got to be every single, and I know this is a pain in the neck. So again, let me stipulate to that across the board. It is a pain in the neck. I do understand that. But based on the reading that we've all done of all the garbage that we've had to read, I think that you need, every time somebody comes, now, obviously, if I'm there doing repair work, I'm going to go in and out on the same day. I don't think that you have to get a declaration every time somebody goes in and out. But the inspector is going to generally come once, right? The buyers may come back more than once, but things change health-wise. People that weren't sick get sick. So I believe, and so does Gov, and so does Ed, and I think the three of us combined make one pretty good lawyer. We all think that that you should do it every single time to protect yourself and the property and the sellers. Because again, what's happening is people are going to lie on this declaration. We know that, but at least you have a document that somebody has given to you that you have a right to rely on, and so does the seller, that says, I'm not sick. You know, when you read through the form, you'll see there's a specific, I think it's paragraph 7 or 8, that specifically says, I'm not sick. I declare under perjury, I'm not sick. I don't have these symptoms, right? And I think that's important. So let me move on. Again, you don't have to do the cleaning yourself. In fact, I read an article the other day in one of your magazines, I think it was Inman, where there's a recommendation, set up a disinfectant station. We're not talking about something fancy, but where you have masks. So if the buyer forgets to bring a mask, buyers should bring their own mask, but if they don't, where you have a mask for the buyer. Denise is smiling, so I'm gathering this happened to you, where a buyer showed up without a mask, right? Where you have sanitizing. You don't have to do the booties and you don't have to do the gloves anymore. But you have to have a mask, you have to have some form of a disinfectant, and then you have to have the wipey dipes for afterwards. And you ought to have an adequate supply of that. Each transaction is going to be a little bit different at the property, ready to go. So you're going to have to spend a little bit of money. I know, Connie, I think you said that you're selling some of these products, so you can get them from the association, and I think that's a good idea. I think that's a purchase well Okay, now you can certainly ask the seller, and many of you are, seller, you need to buy this, here's the bill, just like you would for any other cost related to the sale. But at the end of the day, because ultimate responsibility is on you, set up something where it's all there, ready to go. So that if somebody does show up without a mask, if somebody does show up without a form or whatever, you have all that ready to go. A little bit of planning probably goes a long way, at least in my view. So do that. You can hire somebody. Again, you don't have to do it yourself. You might, again, you can use frankly anybody. That's I would make sure they're over 18 because of the children issue. But I would bring in. You can bring in an assistant. Denise, you can send Steve if you want. He's not doing anything right now, right? So whatever you need to do to make it work, and then figure a way to document. I've talked to Cody about this because, like I said, these came out yesterday. I'm thinking to myself, are we going to do the washroom kind of documentation where you initial that, you've done this each time? I probably should have asked Gov that yesterday, but he's struggling with it too because a lot of this stuff is all brand new. You're only allowed to have one buyer's party at a time. Now, for those of us out here, because our city councils are not quite as stringent, they're careful, they're good people. But like up in Long Beach, for example, one party means one person. Whereas generally speaking, statewide at least, it's one party refers to the buyers themselves. So for example, if it's a husband and wife or two people that are buying a house together or renting a house together, that's considered one buyer party. Okay? And you can go in with the buyers as the buyer's agent. You don't have to stay outside. In some jurisdictions, that's not true. In places up in LA, for example, so you need to be careful about if you're going to wander outside of the Southwest jurisdiction. You need to be careful if you talk to the local board or do something to find out or go online and see what the matrix. CAR has a matrix of all this stuff posted on their website of what the local rules are relative to going on site. You, again, have hand sanitizers, wipes, and a mask ready for everybody. And then when you read through the best practices yourself, there is a cleaning and disinfecting protocol, believe it or not. So you want to do that. No open houses.
I have a question. I have a question.
Who's that?
This is Amy.
Hi, Amy. What up?
What if the home is vacant? Still those rules apply?
Yeah. The seller obviously isn't a problem, but I'm still going in the property. If there's no furniture, but there's obviously it's going to be less of a problem to wipe it down. But what if somebody uses the bathroom? What if somebody climbs stairs and uses the handrail, right? They've touched that stuff. So the next person comes along and in theory can transmit the disease. So whether it's true or not, I'm not a doctor. So yeah, all these rules apply to all properties for sale. Technically, and I don't know how it would work, I haven't really thought it through, it applies to vacant land, okay? It doesn't necessarily apply, however, to 5 units or more, and it doesn't necessarily apply to commercial. So we're going to talk about that separately, or maybe not even today at all. But yes, you can show the property to people. You really need to stay away, however, from non-buying participants. What CAR and what our law firm has recommended, and what I strongly recommend, and believe I think Cody does too, is that you define internally in your firm, what does a serious buyer mean? Is it somebody who's been pre-approved? Is it been somebody who's pre-qualified? Whatever you consider serious. Some offices are saying, we want an offer from you that has a walkaway clause in it. I know that I bought a property in another state. I never saw it, right? Before we made the offer, but I was in a 1031 exchange. I was under a time limit. So we made an offer contingent upon our review of the property. We ended up actually buying that piece of property. And I talked to Ed Zorn. He did the same thing. So, I mean, it's not impossible to buy a property contingent upon going and seeing it. But whatever you think is a quote serious buyer, it certainly doesn't mean that's why open houses are a waste of time. Now you may have, I was talking, and you guys are probably seeing it too, where there's 10, 15 offers on a particular piece of property. I was talking to a broker up in Long Beach, and she had 16 offers on one property. Another broker had 21. So that means that you're showing that property quite a bit. And so that means you're going to have to schedule things better. You have to figure it out. How are you going to pace out your showing so that you give adequate time for people who come late, for people who linger longer, because you're going to need a gap before you let the next group in to be able to disinfect. So be careful about that. Have people, and it says so in the entry protocol, but make sure that you tell people, look, don't touch anything, that you don't have to. Now, for that means you're going to have to get the property ready. But if you're on the buyer side, you counsel your buyer clients and yourself, don't touch anything. And this way, there probably would be that much less to worry about. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about Gatia. This is about preventing the disease from being transmitted from one party to another. Again, make sure you check local jurisdictions. Critically important that you do that. That you check local jurisdictions if you're going outside of Temecula, Murrieta, Wildemar, Lake Elsinore, or Canyon Lake, or Menifee. Because those cities have not adopted any, that I'm aware of. Adam, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe those cities, or Hemet or San Jacinto, have adopted any more stringent ordinances other than what the county has. And what the county is relying on primarily is what the state has indicated, at least for purposes of real estate being an essential service. So, all right, I think there's a lot of other things that Cody put in his checklist, which will get to you in some format before the beginning of next week. But that's pretty much it for the new forms, unless there are, because I'm already used up almost an hour. I have a bunch of questions I see here, so I can stop now and answer questions.
John?
Yes, ma'am. Hello, Deborah. How are you?
Hi. Quick question, of course, regarding rentals. I have weekly.
I'm getting into rentals right now.
Okay.
I'm just getting them in trans. But go ahead and ask the question, because
weekly landscapers don't enter the house. Do I have to have them sign something?
I don't think so, Cody. I don't think, no. People that don't go in the property. But again, if they touch anything, what is it? What if there's a front porch and they sit down and again, you got to think it through. It's not going to be a one size fits all. There is no such thing in this situation. Right. But you got to ask yourself, if I'm going to visit the property, but I'm not going inside, then there's a couple of issues. Number one, is the tenant going to resist me being able to go in the property? Number two, if I'm going inside the property, a repair person, for example, to fix plumbing, yes, there would be a PEAD form for that. And again, there's a special form for that.
I also have painting scheduled on 6 properties, the whole house being painted.
That means it's probably vacant though, right?
Nope, they're there. Not inside, outside.
Okay. Again, it just, I guess my adage is, and you've heard me say this whoa, keep doing that. You've heard me say this over the years, you aren't going to get sued for having something you didn't need. So if you're not sure, and we can't say for any certainty what the courts are going to do with all this, because we don't even have any courts right now. And so from that standpoint, if you're not sure and the person is willing to sign it, what's the problem? You got it in your file. If an issue does come up, which I doubt it will, I have real reservations about any of this being liability related for lots of reasons I'll talk about later. But I don't see where there's the harm in it. But do I need to do it? Probably not. Okay. Any other questions about? Cody, I haven't had a chance to read them, so I know that we've had a lot of questions or comments come in.
There's been a lot of them. I know we're all collectively kind of diving in and trying to answer them on the side to minimize flow.
Can you do me a favor? Because I'd like to see those questions, because when you and I sit down to debrief, I don't have access to those questions. So can you make sure somehow, I don't know if there's a way for Daniel to store them for us, but sure, or at least keep a sort of a running total of or running count. Because I like to know the questions too, because frankly, I haven't thought of everything. I told a broker this morning that, you know, I'm on the dark side of the force. I only get questions and I don't know anything else. So I'd like to hear your questions. And again, if you're being answered by Cody, which is great, I'd sure like to know what they are.
I've read more than probably 10 now about mailing flyers and direct mail magazines. Do you want to address that? I've been addressing some on the side, but I feel like that would be...
I mean, you've probably been telling them don't do that.
Yeah.
As far as mail is concerned, I know we've been getting mail, and a lot of the mail is what you would commonly refer to as junk mail, you know, books and flyers and advertising. And what my wife has done is basically I go get the mail because that gets me out of the house for a couple of minutes, and then we put it in an area of the house and we let it sit for a couple of days. You know, we'll do a quick review and then wash our hands, although we're taking it less seriously, to be perfectly honest, than we have in the past. But, you know, you'd follow a little protocol and then you let it sit. But I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't send that stuff. CAR has said don't. And when you go through these best practices, it says don't. And so I don't think you should. You can do things electronically and there's other ways, but I think you're going to end up having some problems if you do this, if you send that stuff out by mail. All right. I'd like to, again, so take a look at all this stuff. We're going to probably sit down and figure out how we can get some of this information to you.
I have a question, if you can hear me.
I can hear you, Michelle. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm bored. I'm tired of having no life. But go ahead. Otherwise, I'm healthy. So I guess that's a good thing.
Tenant occupied properties for sale. I have one that
we'll talk about that quite a bit in a minute.
Yeah, it's a mess. But we accepted an offer like less than a week before the shelter-in-place order hit. It's a 1031 exchange that the person is in a position, obviously, to have tax liability if they don't close. Mm-hmm. The tenant refused to sign the PAD and refuses anyone to access, and the buyer was prior to them being able to do their inspections. So we're kind of waiting this thing out. Do you have any idea how that's going to play out in the next 45 days?
I thought we'd be done with this by now anyway, so I'm not the best person to prognosticate. A couple of things. First of all, the federal government has revised the 1031 exchange rules so that you have a little more time now. Right. So you're aware of that. So just double check that and make sure, do your math and figure out what your closing date is, because it may be a little bit further along than you said. Number two, although it's rare, we're hearing a lot about tenants not allowing access. But the bigger problem, of course, is getting the tenant out if the tenant needs to leave. If the tenant needs to leave, you're not going to be able to get them out until after the courts open back up again. And assuming you've already given your 60-day notice and doing all those kinds of things. But if the tenant's going to stay,
they're staying.
Okay, if the tenant's going to stay, then in addition to all the other stuff you would typically do, all you can do regarding inspections is if the tenant, and this was made clear to us by the Department of Fair Housing, if the tenant says you can't come in, while it is a legal breach of the contract, okay? No question about that, probably. Well, if you got to reach a contract, but most contracts, that would be a breach to not allow the landlord in after proper notice and under the current law. If the tenant will not let you in, you cannot force yourself in. Period. End of story. Which means you need to do, and this is true even if you're doing an inspection or even if the seller won't let you in. You would then have to do, and CAR has a form that sort of provides some information. But we were getting that question very early on. Sellers would not allow buyers agents to go in to do their avid inspection, and of course tenants weren't allowing prospective landlords or prospective buyers to go in. Then you have to do your inspection the best way you can. If you're the listing agent, you're going to do it based on what you've already seen, and probably you have a better rapport with the seller. If you're the buyer's agent and you can't get in, or you've gotten in so that you could make the offer, but now they won't let you back in to do your avid, then you're going to have to do it based on a virtual, if there's a virtual, a place where you can go look at the virtual property video. If you can do it by memory, just got to document your file very carefully and say, I have not been allowed on the property, therefore this avid or this inspection or whatever it is, this SPQ, this TDS is being done based upon this scenario. And if you do that, that's all you can really do. So if a tenant says you're not coming in, I don't care what PEADs or what the lease says, while you may be able to evict them when all this is said and done, right now there's not much you can do, and therefore you're going to have to do your inspections by virtual means. That's all you can do. Okay? Any other comments or questions? Cody, anything else I should be aware of?
There is some caveat to that. Can I continue on with that just for one moment?
One quick caveat.
Okay. The buyer, who has never been in the property on the 1031, said that if it blows their 1031 because we can't gain access, they won't close without inspection, that they will sue the seller because their contract says seller will provide access to the buyer for inspections. So now we're kind of in a bit of a pinch position.
Well, that's why, although I'm not taking any vacations now, I'm planning on some really good ones down the road, because those kinds of things are so stupid that they're just going to lead to more litigation. The fact of the matter is that the seller's in an impossible position. I don't know that they'd be in breach. Cody and I have had this conversation. Cody actually wrote a really good article on impossibility of performance. The fact is, you guys have heard the phrase act of God, force majeure. There's a lot more to that for lawyers than meets the eye. The bottom line is, what's the seller supposed to do? Right? We've entered into this contract. The tenant, even if the tenant originally said we're going to let people in, has pulled the plug, maybe for negotiation purposes, maybe because they just don't want people in. What's the seller supposed to do? The seller cannot override California law and force the buyer's inspector to go in and do the inspection. The only thing you can do is inspections if hopefully you've got a really good video, and that's all you're going to be able to do. If the buyer has a duty to mitigate his damages, maybe you can work out some language for an addendum that talks about, well, what if there are repairs, or we'll leave this much credit or this or that. I mean, that's all you can really do. I mean, here's the bottom line, and this has been true since day one, is that a lot of people are out there saying, I don't want any of this to affect me at all. I don't want to take any monetary loss, and that's nonsense. Everyone has taken a haircut in one way or another, right? Some of us bigger haircuts, some of us, smaller haircuts. Some of us are actually, it's not us, me, but a lot of people are actually doing pretty well in this market. They're making a lot of money. They've figured out how to game the system. But the reality is that if you can't force yourself into that property, period. So you're going to have to sit down and have a come to Jesus meeting with that buyer's agent and try to sit down and work it out, because you got a person out there who's not a party to the transaction, who's gumming up the works. All right. Anything else, Cody, before I move on to landlord-tenant, the real landlord-tenant stuff?
Yeah. Let me just make.
That was a great question, by the way, Michelle.
If I could make one or two comments and one.
Yeah, please do.
Michelle, you have my number. If something continues to come up there, feel free to give me a call. And I'll be more than happy to pass that on to John, and we'll address that if it comes up further. Just adding to that briefly, there is a lot going on right now with impossibility and practicability and these defenses to contractual performance. I saw one comment on the side which, threatened to sue a tenant for not letting somebody in the home, and ultimately you have to be really careful about comments like that. You guys can't practice law. You guys aren't lawyers. And if it's coming to that situation, you should really seek legal counsel before trying to threaten things that may not be accurate. For example, if you're threatening that a tenant may be sued or somehow liable for not letting you in the property, those same types of contractual performances to defense, impossibility, and practicability, acts of God, are going to apply to the tenant. And so those are really, can be complex legal situations based on the facts. And I would just be very cautious when having those types of conversations.
So here's the deal with landlord-tenant. You've got three or four separate areas that we're going to try and touch on if we possibly can. Number one, there is a moratorium that will not be lifted, if at all, until May 31st, and that is a moratorium against evictions. I suspect this governor will extend those in one way or another. But for right now, there's no evictions. Number two, part B of that is, doesn't matter whether the court said you could, or the governor lifts his stay or not, or his moratorium, there's no courts. And so from that standpoint, there's no place to go to get an unlawful detainer through. Secondly, there is the issue of unpaid rent. Now, we're going to start Monday, I think is the 1st, or Sunday, I'm not sure which. I've lost sight of track. I had to try to remind myself which day it was today. But we're going to see what happens now that we're up to virtually 25% of the population is unemployed. Okay, and so right now we're seeing obviously an uptick in unpaid rent, a greater uptick actually in partially paid rent, and of course some of it's related directly to the pandemic, and some of it is just related to deadbeats who are using this as a golden opportunity to not pay their rent. And so you've got that issue. Then you've got the questions of local jurisdictions. There are presently, and I may be wrong on this because it changes from time to time, but as of last week, there were 141 separate cities with their own rent control / moratoria / rules regarding landlord-tenant. And CAR has a matrix which they update on a pretty regular basis, so that if you're not in a city that doesn't have their own special rule, I don't believe Temecula does, Adam, and I don't know about some of the others, but you need to go to that matrix if you're working outside your area and see, does that city, mostly up in Northern California and certainly in LA County, they may have their own rules. And then lastly, we're about ready to go into the next phase of all this. And so let me talk about a few of those things. First of all, you got a bunch of forms. You've got a form that is a good form that's been around now since April. It is a notice to the tenant. Because here's the deal. When Cody and I, along with Gino, had that conversation last week with the Department of Fair Housing lawyer, I believe and hope that unless the legislature does something incredibly stupid, film at 11 on that, that they're going to tie most of the repayment issues to COVID-related delinquency. So what do I mean by that? That if I'm either my hours have been cut back, or I've been furloughed, laid off, fired, whatever the term you want to use, or I have to stay home because my kids are home and I got no place to send them, right? All those are legitimate COVID-related issues. And if as a result I have sustained financial loss, which has then led me to the inability to pay my rent, either in part or entirely, there are going to be special rules for those people for the arrearages that they have incurred. There is not any question in my mind. I don't know, Cody, if you disagree with me. The sense I got from listening to the lawyer that's drafting the executive order is there is going to be a break for those people. Okay, what he wants to accomplish, however, is that the break does provide the landlord with a little sugar as well. So that, number one, the tenant isn't going to just blow. Now, we all know that the legislature is considering 25% discount on the rent. They're also considering some other issues, so that's one issue. If it's unrelated to COVID, unless the legislature interferes, more than likely the governor is going to not give those people much of a break. Okay, so that's that. Couple of things specific to that phone conversation. Real quickly, what they're thinking about doing is tinkering with the deposit law. Right now, the deposit law talks about things like, you can have only up to 2 months of deposit on an unfurnished unit, 3 if it's furnished, unless there's military involved, and there's some special issues for that. But reality is, and I'm going to look to some of you that do property management, Deborah and Michelle, I know you do some and some others. I've been told by most of the property managers that we represent that really most tenants only pay 1 month as a deposit. Some 2, but mostly 1. So that's one issue. But they're trying to figure out how can a landlord, without any downside liability at all, all the different rules, 21 days and all these other rules, can use that deposit at least to defer 1, maybe 2 months rent, and then they'll work on an elongated program for paying or replenishing that security deposit. But at least the landlord can pay their bills as the bills come current. So that's one thing they're talking about. Another thing they're talking about is they're wondering, and we really pushed back pretty hard on this, and Gino did a great job, and so did the other people that were from the other associations, in pushing back on this idea, well, you can't even start an unlawful detainer till the tenant is so many months behind or so much in dollars behind. And we hope that they won't do that, because it'll create such a mess. But one of the things that they probably will do, and we don't know exactly how, we gave them some ideas as to how they might do that, is say, look, let's look at the reality of the situation. I'm 4 months behind in my rent. I pay at least a third of my income to rent, and now I've gotten my job back and I'm starting life over again. But I've got all these other bills and I've got all this past due rent. So number one, I got to start paying my rent on time. But as to that arrearage, there is going to be some type of a program coming down from the state that will allow a tenant who is in a COVID-related arrearage situation to repay that amount over time. Now, they may sweeten the pot by saying, if the landlord is willing to take a lump sum amount, then this will happen or that'll happen. None of us really know that right now, but what we do know is that there is going to be some type of a benefit or protection for both the landlord and the tenant in the event that there is a situation. But then the other practical aspect of this, ladies and gentlemen, is what? If I am 4 months behind in my rent and I can't pay it, and I'm legitimately able to pay my rent plus a percentage of the arrearages over a period of time, I can walk down to the bankruptcy court. And if I walk down to the bankruptcy court, what can I do? I can have a Chapter 13, which is a cram down where the judge is going to say, we're going to keep you in your property so you don't get homeless. We're going to require you to pay the payment as they come due from now on time. And based upon the plan you've proposed to us, debtor, we're going to allow you to pay the rearages back over an extended period of time. And I can't remember, I'm not a bankruptcy lawyer. I think it's up to 5 years. So it would be better for the landlord then to sit down and work out that plan. And as somebody's mentioning right now, there's a form for that. And they modified it yesterday. And so the form is the repayment form that does allow you to sit down and work through a repayment plan. You could do it right now. We have clients that are doing it right now. We have clients that have said to their tenants, look, I need to get some money because I got a mortgage to pay. I've got taxes to pay. I've got insurance to pay, whatever it might be, association dues, right? I've got a carry that I've got to meet every month. And so if you'll pay me a certain amount, I will consider it payment in full. And so you're going to have to work that out in a business way, because ultimately these people, again, what's that old adage? You can't get blood out of a turnip. These people aren't going to be able to pay you back, and they're going to go bankrupt. And if you move them out, you're probably realistically never going to see that money. And so it's up to you and your client, or if you're the landlord yourself. I know I've got a couple of rental properties. Fortunately, they're not in California because I saw the writing on the wall. But even there, I'm sitting down with my tenants and saying, look, what can you do? Fortunately, none of them have been laid off, but there's still other issues involved because even if they've not been laid off, I know that I have a friend that works at one of the casinos, and he's been told to come back to work at a 15% discount in pay. And so, again, there's going to be residual impacts to this, and we're going to have to think it through in a business-like way. Those people that are going to be rigid in their thinking, that are going to be not willing to compromise, I think are going to be a lot more trouble. And obviously, you're going to have that bottom feeder group of tenants who are simply going to game the system any way that they possibly can. We all know that. Okay? So I think that basically covers our DFEH talk. I want to, let's see, repayment aiming to, be very careful about late fees right now. Be very careful about late fees because all you're doing is putting salt on the wound as far as I'm concerned. You know, it seems to me, and again, the bigger you are, I don't know, Deborah, I know you do a lot of property management, and I know there's a bunch of others on this call that have a lot of doors, but the reality is you're going to need to sit down with those landlords, number one, find out, get your instructions, talk to them, have a business, have an adult conversation with them, and then go to those tenants either directly or through probably yourself, and sit down with each tenant, and to the extent you can, try and earmark who are our problem children going to be, because you're probably going to find out that not everyone's going to be a problem. The statistics say that most people are paying their rent. Not everybody, certainly, but because of stimulus checks and unemployment insurance and the liberalization of a lot of that, I know that at the Stampede, we offered jobs back, and a lot of people said no because they're making more money on unemployment. And so they have money. And if they have more money than they had before, there shouldn't be a reason why they're not paying their rent. The problem is you got no place to go. You can give a notice now. I wouldn't give the 3-day notice because things are going to change between now. But you can give a 60-day notice now. You can give a 90-day notice. You can do that. You're not going to have any place to go to enforce it, at least for the next month or two. But you can give notices. But really what you need to do is take a business-like approach to these things, in my opinion. That the forms are there for you to use, but on a case-by-case basis, you need to do that. Looking at the time here. And so what can your landlord afford to do, right? If you own the property free and clear, you're in a lot better position. I mean, you still got taxes to pay and insurance and other fees, and but what can a landlord do to allow the tenant a period of time? Is it 6 months, that will take your bill? If one of the things we talked about with DFEH is a forgiveness. Cody and I do this all the time when we settle cases, that we think you owe us $100,000. If you pay us $60,000 over a period of time, we'll forgive the other 40. It's called a stipulated judgment. There's things you can do like that, where you actually work with the tenant and say, you got to give them a little bit of sugar, and say, basically, this is what we're willing to do. So each landlord is going to be different. Because if I own my property free and clear, I'm in a lot better position. There's a bill before the legislature, by the way, that CAR is opposing, that will put a prevention from evictions on COVID-related leases as well for commercial purposes. So say, for example, I own the Stampede. We have a rent. We've been paying our landlord. We worked out a deal. I'm not going to go into the details of it. We worked out what I thought was a pretty fair deal for both him and for us. And but at some point, if this shutdown continues, I'm going to have to go back to that landlord and say, we need to renegotiate because we have no revenue coming in and we still have expenses. And so all that's going to have to be worked out. Those of you that do commercial, I think you guys are going to see a lot of empty units, because a lot of people are going, hey, why do I need to go back to that expensive office lease when I got my people working remotely? So a lot of stuff is going to change over time. So let's be aware of that. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to point out. Oh, I want to give you guys a heads up on something Gov and I talked about yesterday, and that we're going to talk about with the CAR lobbying. San Francisco, as you know, has been leading the charge on a lot of this landlord-tenant stuff. The assemblyman that wrote the rent control and all the other people that are dealing with all this rent control stuff all come from San Francisco. San Francisco has been the leader of probably the most stringent rent control in California. And they now have an ordinance which is being looked at by other jurisdictions that say this: if you own a complex that has 3 or more units, before you could put that property on the market, you must first offer it to one of these 6 approved nonprofits who provide affordable housing for people of less means. You must then give them an opportunity to buy the property at whatever you're going to offer it for. If they choose after 25 days to not do that, you may then put it on the market and list it for sale. However, you must then go back to those 6 potential buyers that have been approved by the winners that have been designated by the city, and you need to offer them a right of first refusal, which, of course, I talked to Ed Zorn yesterday, who's also a commercial broker, And that's gonna have a problem. That's gonna cause a lot of problems, I think, because why would I make an offer knowing that I might get beat out by one of these nonprofits? Then once you sell the property, you will file a declaration under penalty of perjury with criminal sanctions and ready to be imposed that you complied with that law. Why do I tell you about a San Francisco law that has no impact on Temecula or Murrieta? Because it may have something, it may find its way into the state, and poor Adam or poor Walter or poor Gino or all three of them are going to have to figure that out for you guys, and they're going to have to deal with that. Because if it starts in one city with this legislature and their willingness to be very progressive, I still don't know why we call it that, but we may see something like that. Those are the kinds of things that are going on around the state, is that you need to be aware of, is that if you think it's bad now, I suspect that it's, I don't, Adam, if you agree with me, I can't see anybody else, so I don't know who's on, but I can see Adam. I don't know if you agree with me. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better in terms of property-related issues. You've got a lot of stuff going on at the legislature right now. And then when you see what some of these cities are doing, because what the state has said, what we tell you to do is the minimum. So everything I've talked about today, all of the disinfecting and all this other stuff, that's the rock bottom. Local jurisdictions can require more. Okay? So any other questions? I know you've been getting questions that I haven't had a chance to read them, but what kinds of questions you get? You keep moving on me. What kind of questions are you getting?
We're getting a lot about, there's been a few about just landlord-tenant stuff. One interesting one, which I've heard in other presentations and which comes up frequently in our calls, is the ability to remove a door to paint and then leaving the tenant without a door in the event that they are refusing to leave. Do you want to just address that briefly? Because I'm assuming that that's a common question, or at least a common thought.
Is it? Well, I'm assuming it's not the front door, right? Is it? So I don't know the genesis of the question, but
right.
If you're going to remove, I'm not a painter. Those of you that know me know I don't have any tools at all. So I'm going to answer this question. I probably look to Adam because I know you're pretty handy. But if you're going to remove a door, how long does it take to paint a door? Does it take more than a day to paint a door?
It's the front door.
Huh? It is the front door. Well, then you better make arrangements to secure that property, Deborah. I mean, what do you think? I mean, it seems to me you better make arrangements to secure that property, because if that door stays off for a long time, you got some real issues there with exposure and all that. Forget the coronavirus for a second, right? You've just exposed that house to all kinds of security issues, and so you better work that out with the tenant ahead of time.
I would not recommend.
Again, to me, a lot of this stuff, when we hear these questions, I think to myself, common courtesy, right? You got a human being sitting in the property without a front door. Come on. Figure it out. Work it out. Get it back there as quick as you can. Why can't you put a substituted door? I know when I was a kid, I used to put my fist through doors, and you put up a door fairly quickly, right? And it doesn't take that long, particularly if you have a best friend whose dad is a carpenter. We had to do that a couple of times, unfortunately. I was Italian temper when I was a boy. And so that's something that you just got to take care of. I don't know how you guys would practically handle that, but boy, you better get that door up pretty quick. First time I've ever heard that question. Anything else that you got? The question is misunderstood from Jessica, so maybe you can restate the question. Paint the door first thing in the AM and put Vaseline around the weathering of the, yeah, maybe, I don't know what the practical, that's not a legal question. That would have to be something that would have to be addressed to an actual person with talent to fix things, which is not me. Okay, what's the other question that you have?
I think for the time being, I see a lot of talk about the door still. I think for the time being, we're pretty much good on questions, and then we can open it up here in about 10 minutes, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, let's talk about some general issues that are coming up every day, okay? And then if you want to ask questions about the transactions itself, the RPA extensions, any of the other forms, that's fine. I want you all to take a good hard look at your E&O insurance for two reasons. Number one is you want to make sure what is covered, because whether there's going to be a lot of lawsuits or not, we don't know. We know there's going to be a lot of court actions. There's going to be a lot of constitutional questions that start coming up. But take a look at your E&O insurance, because here's the thing. I had a conversation with an insurance lawyer the other day, because I'm just curious about a couple of things. Is that, okay, so I'm going to pick on Adam for a second, just because I know him and he's somebody I admire a lot. So but I'm going to pick on you for a second. So Adam got sued, right? He had a house. Somebody went into the house, purchased the house, got sick. Now sues everybody. Somebody mentioned before, everybody's going to get sued. Sues Adam, and now we have a question about liability. Is Adam liable because somebody got sick in one of his listings? So, and let's say it's determined that Adam didn't do disinfecting or can't prove he did disinfecting on every unit. So now you've got someone who is physically injured because of something Adam failed to do, that his obligation was that was imposed on him by law. Okay? Number one is the plaintiff's lawyer, in my opinion, is going to have a very difficult time proving that Adam is liable for the personal injury, because COVID, we're not tracking yet. And so how do we know that the person got sick at that house? Obviously, if there was somebody in the house that was sick and Adam didn't disclose it, there's no PAD, that could be an issue. I believe that plaintiff's lawyers have a very difficult time dealing with that issue. Cody and I have had that conversation. We don't know for sure because we haven't had the case yet. We know there's been a lot of COVID-related cases already filed. A lot of lawyers out there that I guess decided to become a cottage industry of COVID plaintiff lawyers, and so there will be that group. They'll be there. I have no doubt about that. But here's the other question. I'm suing Adam for my personal injury, right? Is that E&O coverage, or is that some other type of coverage? What you need to do is talk to your insurance agent and make sure I don't think there's going to be a lot of liability. I could be wrong, but there may be a lot of lawsuits, so you're going to want to have, coverage to cover the cost of defense. Is there going to be coverage under your current policy for these types of lawsuits? And it's a simple phone call. You go make it. Now, some of you own businesses, and some of you have purchased business interruption insurance. And initially, all of the insurance companies were rejecting. This is a great policy. I know Adam and Connie and Denise and some of the others that I've known for a long time. Michelle, you know that I lost a building about 10 years ago. I had to have it completely rebuilt. That was where my office was located. It was completely burned to the ground. And the business interruption insurance, frankly, kept me afloat, because business interruption insurance covered those costs, both salaries and all the other costs of running my business while I couldn't run it until I got up and running, and then paid to supplement that business with extra people and things like that so I could get up and running back to full speed faster. A great policy to have if you own any kind of a business, including a brokerage. But if I make a claim, let me give you an example. I'll be personal. Stampede's closed down right now, right? It's a bar that I own, and it provides me with a little play money. And so I don't have that money right now, and neither do my partners. So we filed a claim for business interruption. The initial was to reject. Why? Because they say they don't cover personal injury. But wait a minute. We didn't shut down because somebody got sick. We shut down because the city and the county and the state and the federal government came in and said, thou shalt shut down. They rescinded the denial, and now we're in full tilt argument about whether they're going to cover and how much. Why do I tell you that? You should make the claim. On April the 20th, Commissioner Padilla, who is the current insurance commissioner, wrote a letter to all of the California insurance companies, basically telling them, you better act in good faith in terms of dealing with this business interruption issue. So make sure you take a look at your policy, read it carefully. If you need to have your lawyer look at it, that's fine, or sit down. We've been dealing with our broker. He's been awesome. And sit down and look at that policy and see if it's arguably coverage is there, and probably it is. Make the claim, because in a different part of your policy, and this is true for all your insurance, you have a duty to tender that claim to your insurance company. And if you tender that claim to your insurance company in the proper manner, you've started the process. Then you can deal with them. Right now, we're dealing with them, and we suspect that, well, I'm not going to jinx it, but I'm comfortable that there'll be some resolution to the matter, because, again, the insurance commissioner, nobody knows this, and they're certainly not going to tell you, but the insurance commissioner wrote a letter to every insurance company in California and made it pretty clear, you guys better act in good faith. And I will send a copy of that letter to anyone who wants it, if you want to kind of beef up your demand to your insurance carrier. Again, these guys are making a fortune right now. I'm paying insurance for a building that's closed down. I'm paying and while a lot of us are doing that right now, guys, don't feel sorry for them. I see some people are saying, send me the letter. I'm not going to remember who you are. Send me an individual email. Go to our website. Just send me an email. It's jbg@tylerbursch. And once I get a list over the next day or two, I'll scan it over to Debbie or Linda, and they can forward it out. Yeah, there you go. It's right up there on the screen. So also keep in mind that the governor has executed a couple of executive orders. This affects everybody, but it particularly affects the brokers. As you know, under California law, real estate agents are considered independent contractors, but by the same token, you're supposed to carry a workers' compensation for them. The governor signed an executive order about 2 weeks ago, I guess it was, Cody, basically saying that if an employee in an essential service, so that would be all of the people that work in real estate right now, if an employee, and again, independent contractors are deemed employees for workers' comp, gets sick, it will be presumed that they got sick on the job. Okay? And that means that the workers' compensation company or the employer themselves will have to rebut that presumption, which creates all kinds of hostility between you and your employees, number one. Number two, realistically, it's going to be very hard to rebut that presumption, which means what? That the reality is that they'll be paying off a lot of these claims, and that might affect your premiums down the line. So if you have a lot of employees, get ready. They've also changed, and Cody, you sent me an email this morning, because Cody does a lot more employment law than I do. They're looking at expanded family leave. They're looking at increased taxes to recover some of this unemployment money. So I guess the answer to let's get business up and running again is to saddle them with more debt. Then, of course, you've got the new Proposition 13 rule, which goes on the ballot. I think it's November. When's our election, Adam? November 3rd, I think, something like that. And it will split roll. So if I'm renting my building on a triple net lease and that proposition passes, then the rent, or excuse me, the tax on that building will then be at the current fair market value rather than under the Prop 13 protection. And if that's true, those costs will be passed on to the tenant. If I'm paying a gross lease where it's not automatically passed on to me as a tenant, then I'm still going to have to add my prices. The landlord's going to have to somehow come up with that, or I'm going to have to add it to the cost of doing business. So again, more costs. So that's happening. All right, I'm going to finish up with, then I want to open up. Again, I have other stuff, but frankly, I'd rather hear from your questions. MLS, the new clear cooperation rules are now in effect. Talked to Ed yesterday, who's the vice president, and is part of his responsibility is compliance. And what they're saying is, look, the issues are going to be one of two things. If you just take my listing and put the thing in active, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. But if you're going to take my listing, and we've said, you know what, I don't want to make it active yet because I'd like to see how this pandemic works itself out. So let's put it on hold for a while. And in your new listing agreement that comes out on June 24th, there will actually be a place where we can talk about coming soon. What that's going to mean is that I can put it in the coming soon category, which if you look on your statuses now, there's a coming soon. Most of you have already done that. There's a coming soon category. And if you do that, then you can put it on for up to 21 days incoming soon. If after 21 days you do nothing, it will automatically convert over to active. The computer will do that automatically. So on the 22nd day, your listing has gone active. If you don't want to put it on active and want to continue to hold it, you would then have to actively put it on hold, but not in the coming soon category. Because coming soon does not mean coming eventually. It means coming soon. Okay, and soon has been defined by the CRMLS directors, who are all realtors, as 21 days. Okay, and if you don't do that, then you face a fine up to $2,500. It's minimum of 5, up to 25, and it's based upon 1% of the list price. So most, in this area at least, most of the fines are going to be $2,500. You will get a warning, but if you do it habitually, if you're just one of these people, and none of you are going to do that. You didn't show up here today to listen to me drone on for 2 hours because you're about violating the rules. At least I hope not, right? But what's going to end up happening is at some juncture, the MLS is going to report it to your professional standards people. If this person is habitually violating the MLS rule for coming soon, well, guess what just happened? We're going to file an ethics complaint against you. Because not only are you violating the MLS rule, but you're violating your obligations to your clients potentially. You are misleading people about the availability of the property habitually, which is a violation of Article 2. You are not properly communicating because at the end of the day, the MLS is a cooperative, and so it's automatic that you're not cooperating, and you're probably violating your advertising requirements to be truthful, which is Article 12. So you're facing now not a $2,500 fine, but a $15,000 fine. So I see that happening. The other thing that I was talking to Linda Conaway, who works for Tyler Bursch and has been with me for 30 years, probably one of the 2 best professional standards people in the state. And what she was, what her and Lori Smith, who works at another association, were telling us is that they're getting a lot of complaints about signs. Where you put a sign on the property and then you put, coming soon or virtual open house. The trouble with a virtual open house is it better be virtual. But again, you guys all understand that if I put any kind of an open house sign on a property, people are likely to drop by. So you need to be very careful about that, because if your seller allows people to come in without you being there, and you're ultimately responsible for making sure that it gets disinfected. See how that could all work against you? So be very careful about coming soon and about virtual signs. I think I'm going to stop there. Cody, is there anything else you wanted to? I know we have a ton of other information about risk management and opening back up again, all that kind of stuff. But we're just. All I can tell you guys, as when we start going into some of these questions, I know we've got at least 5, is that you've just got to be aware that you're professionals. And for Cody and I, that means every morning, the first thing we do when we get up, and probably the last thing we do before we shut it down later than usual, is we read and we read and we read, right? The value that we bring to the table, which is what we bring to you, is we're reading as much as we possibly can, trying to decipher. Well, your value to your clients to do the same. It means you go to the CAR site as often as you can, because if you ever wondered why you were a realtor, now is the time to know why you're a realtor. Because besides the government affairs people doing the work they're doing, and the work that is being done by the local associations and by the state and by NAR, there's just so much information. Go to our website. Cody's a great writer. He's been putting a lot of stuff up, as have some of the others. And so look at Inman, look at Realty World, look wherever you need to look, stay current. Read these forms. Some of you already have, which means that you, in one day, you read all the new forms, read the best practices, and yay for you. Most of you haven't had time to do that. You have a life, but you're going to have to take the time over the next couple of days to look at all that stuff. So with that, I have a couple of questions that were pre-sent to me but I'll see what else is there. If there's any other questions that Cody, you wanted to where we can open it up to the group.
Yeah, there's a few questions coming through regarding people are looking for a kind of a hard and fast date for courts opening. And John, I know we talked
as soon as possible. How's that?
Exactly. If there's not one, and right now there are, even though the moratorium on evictions expires May 31st, there's still a judicial council emergency order which established new rules regarding the summons of unlawful detainers. Essentially, it makes them very difficult to go through, if not impossible. You could file it, but you definitely can't move forward with it. So it's something to talk to your eviction attorneys about and really bounce off them if you have a situation which requires it. But at this time, no, there's not really a hard and fast date as to when these courts are opening for unlawful detainers.
Right. And the bottom line is that you can't even get the process started. You can't even get a summons issued. So that's a practical problem. And I suspect that practical problem will extend far beyond May 31st. Whether the courts open up or not, I won't be shocked that this governor and or this legislature expand these rules, particularly as it applies to past due. Well, we may be able to start collecting rent again. Maybe the moratorium for rent payments related to COVID are lifted. Maybe that'll happen. Probably not on May 31st. That's day after tomorrow, isn't it? 2 days.
2 days.
Sunday.
3 days.
So it's not going to happen. And if it does, if it dies on its own, then great. But that doesn't mean the courts are open, and so we're still going to continue to see a problem. So hard and fast. If you wanted my best guess, September 1st. I don't know how and again, different counties are going to be doing different things. Riverside will probably open up sooner than that. I see that somebody said they have something scheduled for June 11th. If it can be done, I mean, they're going to start opening up court calls and things like that. So if it's a simple hearing that can be done where there's not a lot of objections, I think they'll start doing court calls earlier, but not trials and evictions and things like that.
I believe that Riverside County starts opening for hearings as of June 1st. I know I have a few in the first couple weeks, but they're all telephone, Zoom.
Right.
They have their own system that they're using for that. So it'll start slowly opening. You'll start seeing some of those things like probate hearings start moving forward. But basically trials, unlawful detainers, those are still going to be a little bit away.
What they'll do more than likely is because of the fact that the Constitution requires that criminal cases be done as expeditiously as possible, and there's lots of rules for how that works, they're going to probably do criminal cases first. Then because unlawful detainers do have statutory priority, they'll probably start doing unlawful detainers next. But they're probably going to take them in order. So if you're just getting into the process, you're at the back of the line. And I know up in LA, they're talking about as late as mid-year next year before they can get to the backlog. Just keep in mind what's going on here. All the cases, I have a $400,000 commission dispute, 5 lawyers, not this board, the other board, and we have to extend the arbitration. Well, here's the problem. We're looking at extending it to September because the parties won't agree on a Zoom hearing. So, which can be done. You can do an ethics hearing by Zoom. But what we're looking at is that here's the problem. They're all trial lawyers. And so we have to find a date because all of the cases that they've had since mid-February have all been continued to an uncertain date that will start peaking up again, maybe September, maybe October. We don't know. Okay. Number 2, we don't know when the cities are going to allow the businesses to fully open in a manner that will allow for less social distancing. And then lastly, we simply don't know what the courts are going to do with the backlog, because if I had a trial that was scheduled, say, on May 15th, the trial date was vacated, which means it's now being pushed at the end of the queue for whenever they do open up, plus all the stuff that was already scheduled in September, October. So when you start thinking about that and you're negotiating with your clients and you're negotiating with your tenants and all that, keep in mind that it's all well and good that you don't like what's going on, but it's not going to last. It may last for a while. The other thing is that while the governor may lift his moratorium, his emergency order may remain in effect. And as Adam knows, I think it's 986, is that the bill I'm thinking of, says that the payment requirements, the repayment is not extended, or excuse me, connected to the governor's moratorium lift. It's connected to when the governor releases his emergency order. And Cody pointed out to me last week, there's a whole bunch of emergency orders that have never been released, these wildfire ordinances and all this other stuff. So it's just, if you're confused, don't worry about it, because there's so much going on that's uncertain right now that we're all trying to keep sensitive. My job is to read this stuff. Cody's job is to read this stuff and to try to push out as much information as we can, which we're going to be starting to do now on a more regular basis. So another question? Any other question? I have a couple here, but I'd rather.
Yeah, I'm going to go up and just start kind of reading some of them. One is, which is interesting because it just came out, and I guess to some extent it's uncertain. The BPPP states stage 2 expansion, and it brings about some interesting questions as to what will happen in stage 3, or if they'll still be applicable. At this time, I don't know, and I don't know that we discussed that with Gov or that he even knows.
I did. What CAR is doing, and they're in a much better position because they've got a bunch of lawyers who are doing nothing but this kind of stuff, and they're all top-notch lawyers. I think, I've said it before, I think the CAR legal staff is probably the best real estate law firm in the state. And what they're doing is they're monitoring all this on a daily basis. And as soon as we go into whatever phase we go into next, if there are changes to what's out there now, they will immediately make those changes and will bring them to your attention. Okay? Yesterday, that's exactly what they did. We came out with the new best practices from the state, which was the COVID-19 plan that came from OSHA. They jumped all over it. They created the forms that we talked about earlier this morning, and then they created the BPP. But if the BPP or any of the other forms need to be changed, they'll do that. They've already changed the PAD 3 or 4 times since this started. They've had to. And you don't blame CAR for that. Thank them, because what they're doing is they're monitoring this stuff for you, and then they're hopefully trying to get you the most current information. My job, Cody's job, is to stay ahead of it. I check the CAR website. I'm a member of a discussion group at NAR, and so I'm getting a pretty good view of what's going on at the national level. But your job is to read this stuff. Can't make you do that. So read this stuff. By the way, at the national level, real quickly, let me tell you what a hot topic is going on right now. People bringing their children to a showing of some sort, either an open house, shoot myself in the head. Not an open house, a showing, or a looking at a property for rent. Okay, be careful about that. First of all, try and carefully discourage people from bringing their children. But if you do bring if you do bring a child, number one, somebody has to sign the PEAD on their behalf, and the visitor form, one of the forms has a place to do that. Number two, talking to the DFEH lawyer last Wednesday, you need to be really careful, particularly on a rental situation, of discriminating against people with families. So you can't say no children allowed or this or that. It's just a question of gently discouraging people from bringing children. And that there's actually in the new form coming out on June 24th a place for that. So keep in mind that this isn't a California issue. This is coming up all over the place. So any other questions?
Yeah. There's a few here still. One of them, which is interesting, and I'll just clarify it because I saw it earlier as well. There is a slight inconsistency. I don't know if you noticed this, John, between what's posted on the door and some of the best practices that came out in the BPPP. One of them says gloves, the other one doesn't. After talking with Gov, we've clarified gloves are no longer required. It's just a mask, no booties, those situations. But I would just encourage you guys to keep up to date on that and check your local ordinances to make sure there's not something more restrictive.
That's why I would use the one that came out yesterday.
Yeah.
Because although there are some minor variances, you always want to use the most recent form. So I know it's a problem, and particularly those of you that have lots and lots of listings, but you're going to need to send somebody back out, pull down the one that you should have been using. And I'm not going to ask for a show of hands of those of you that have not put up anything on their doors, because this is rule's been in effect now. Hello?
John, I posted that in chat. They can find that form in chat.
Okay,
I posted
good.
the new form.
Okay. Thank you, Connie. Appreciate that. You're always on top of stuff. Appreciate that. But I would use the new one. That means you go out, take the old one down, and put the new one up. And it's one page. It's really simple. Bring tape and do that. I would do that. Okay. Any other questions? You're right. Cody's right. There are inconsistencies, and again, they actually reduced the number of things you have to have. Before you had to have booties. Now you have a whole bunch of booties you bought that you don't have to use. You bought a whole bunch of gloves, you don't have to use them. So when this is all said and done, Connie, we can have a balloon fight at your place, and we'll use the booties and we'll use the gloves. Okay. A couple of other things. I talked one thing real quickly. Talked to Ed yesterday. A lot of this stuff regarding what you're going to require, you can put in the agent remarks. You cannot post the form on agent remarks because that's considered a photo. And you cannot put anything relating to what you're requiring in public remarks. Okay? Just know that. But you can put them all in the agent remarks. Go ahead, Cody. Any other questions?
No, I think I can answer one of these ones. Some of them are duplicative. Do you want to move on to some of the preset ones, and then we'll see if we have any others?
Well, I'll just give one that's really not related to COVID. When showing homes of larger acreage or more rural land parcels, sometimes clients or agents will drive their vehicles on site to access or better view the property. Okay, in the case of a mishap or accident where damage or bodily injury may be involved, does the property owner have any exposure or liability? Yes. The answer is yes. If first of all, it's not trespassing because you've invited me onto the property. You've said this property is for sale, right? If you post by appointment only, you may get some benefit, but the reality is that if you invite anyone onto your property for any reason whatsoever, and it's of a commercial nature, right? It's called premises liability. But if I drive onto your property and I get into an accident because I'm a bad driver, that's not your responsibility. That is the responsibility of the driver. So liability is a relative term. It means that you breached a duty that you have to me by not keeping the property safe. You go into the Stampede for a beer, or you do something like that and you get injured, I'm going to be liable, right? That's if I did something to make the property unsafe. We've had those cases. There's a major case called Hall versus Aurora Lending that talks about that. But generally speaking, that's going to be covered, I hope, by property owners' insurance because they have that type of insurance. So the property owner will or should at least be covered for that type of injury. But yeah, should we take any extra precautions? Yeah. Whatever your restrictions are, that's what you should put under agent remarks, right? And if the person is unrepresented, tell them in advance, send them an email, whatever you need to do. That's not COVID related. That's a good thing. That's a great question. Another question that came up this morning, which is not related to COVID, has to do with Section 8. So I want to reiterate what the rules are. Section 8, all they simply did is under California law, there has been for quite a while a law that says you may not discriminate against a person in terms of selling or renting, usually rental, because of source of income. And they added to that group, it's been, people that are getting child support, welfare payments, government pensions, Social Security, whatever it might be. You can't discriminate based on the source of income if I otherwise qualify, right? And they've added Section 8 vouchers if the property and the owner of the property qualify for Section 8. So if I have income, and let's say you've set the number, and pick a number, it doesn't matter, that in order for me to qualify to rent your house, I have to have at least $2,000 a month of income. Okay? And as long as you treat everyone exactly the same, the fact that some of my income is coming from Section 8 is not relevant to the overall issue of whether or not I qualify. You may not discriminate based on Section 8 housing. Okay? So I hope that clears it up for everybody. That doesn't mean you can't say, well, I want a credit score of so much, but you better have that same credit score for everybody, right? Or the income must be at least this much. You can do that. You know, whatever criteria you would normally send to rent out a property is still perfectly valid, so long as you don't discriminate by race, by creed, by source of income, by familial status, as long as you don't do that. One of the things I'm going to talk to Connie about down the road is I do want to have a fair housing program, whether I'm participating in it or simply make an arrangement to have somebody. But we have a contact at the DFEH now, and I got to tell you, I've done a couple of programs with him, and he doesn't tell people what they want to hear. That's for sure. They're never going to get that from the Department of Fair Housing, but at least you'll understand what the rules are, and for discrimination. Any other questions we're getting? Any other?
Yeah, and this one's along the same.
We got about 12 minutes.
It's more of a DFEH question.
Okay.
As a landlord, are you legally allowed to say that only people with a certain type of income qualify? For example, could you limit it to only law enforcement or military housing?
I don't know about. That's a great question. I'd have to do a little research on that. My attitude is what we're seeing, and we had that. Remember that case where they were not willing to rent to anyone who was a first responder,
right?
Because they were fearful of people getting sick or fearful of people becoming injured on the job and being unable to pay. I thought that was discriminatory because it was a blanket discrimination. But as far as saying the housing is limited only to people who are law enforcement, and it has to be defined. I don't know that would be a problem. I'd be open to any conversation. I don't see off the top of my head where that would be a problem. It's not discriminating based on, because there are people that fit into the classes that are protected who are firefighters, who are EMTs, who are nurses, who are law enforcement. And so as long as you treat everybody within those limited categories the same, military, I think you'd be okay.
Yeah, and they did clarify, can you try to fashion that around like a source of income from law enforcement? I think the question kind of stays the same. It would need a little bit more research because it's just
the bottom line is that whenever you're dealing with source of income, you've got to be really careful, particularly if you're discriminating against that person, saying, and that's where the welfare payments and the Section 8 payments and all that come in. All right, what else you got there for me?
So I'll wait for one other one to come in, but I got a question, a really good question earlier from Adam Ruiz.
Really? A good question from Adam?
I mean, one of many. Just trying to give credit where credit's due. But Adam, you can jump in and clarify if I misstate it. Essentially, the question was, what is your opinion on whether or not a for sale by owner would have to comply with some of these same stringent regulations? And essentially, can you start losing sellers to these FSBOs because they don't want to comply with those more restrictive regulations that the realtors have to abide by?
That is, Adam, kudos, good question. I'm looking over here because Adam is on my screen over here. First of all, if I'm a buyer's agent, then, and I know that the seller is unrepresented and the seller may not necessarily be complying with the rules that have been imposed on. Remember, real estate has been deemed an essential business, but that doesn't mean that it's business as usual. So that all these rules then emanate from the fact that you have been declared essential, but not under business as usual. It would seem to me that the seller still has ultimate liability to potential buyers, not necessarily to use the forms that CAR produces or not necessarily to do whatever. But again, I am now representing the seller or the buyer. I believe that as a fiduciary to that buyer, it would be incumbent, and again, this is a very conservative position, but it would seem to me that I would want to take the position that if I'm dealing with a seller who doesn't have knowledge of not just the COVID issues, but of all the issues, disclosure issues and all that, I'm going to have to, number one, put a form out there and there's a CAR has a form. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's the I'm not your agent form. Okay? It says, I'm representing the buyer. Maybe it's a single party list, but you also want to attach to that another form that says, you'll pay me a commission. Here's our single party list agreement, but you're also going to pay me, or you're also going to understand I'm not your agent. I do not have a fiduciary obligation to you. But then you look to your buyer who you're trying to protect. And I would think out of an abundance of caution, at least as to my buyer, I would ask the seller to sign the PEADS form, if they will. And if not, I would counsel my client that they are not willing to sign it, which ought to raise a red flag. And then I would ask the seller, before I come in, may I open the house up for my client and may I disinfect it? If they say no, then you've got to sit down with your buyer and say, are you really willing to go into that house? But that's the way I would handle that. And it shouldn't come up very often. People don't want to get sued. And frankly, part of the best service you're going to say to these people is, look, if you don't do this, you're exposing me and you and everybody else to liability. But again, if somebody's willing to be totally uncooperative in any of this, to me, that raises a red flag. And I would be very, very cautious. Go ahead, Adam.
John, I posed that a little bit over to Cody too, and thanks for giving that perspective. Kind of almost on the other side, I've heard from other friends and sellers out there that maybe they don't want to have these signs posted, or they don't want to worry about all these disinfecting rules and all of that stuff. And my question to Cody kind of was, does that then put us in a position to potentially lose out on a listing side? Hey, I'm telling you, if you're going to list with me, this is what I'm going to require of you. This is what the recommendations are. No, I don't like that, so I'm just going to sell this on my own. Thank you.
I don't disagree with you. I think Cody and I all the time don't get retained by clients because of our requirements. One of those requirements is I don't want to represent you if you're not going to be honest with me, if you're not going to be cooperative with me. If in your case, you don't have to worry too much about the money aspect because there's going to be a commission agreement that's contingent upon successfully selling the house. But there's lots of times where any professional, whether it's a realtor or a lawyer, is going to say, you know what, this client is just too much trouble. Now, first thing you can do as a public service is sit down with that person and say, look, I understand that you don't want to do all this. I'm going to do most of it for you. That's going to be part of my job. These are duties that have been superimposed on us during this pandemic. I'm going to have to do these things. So you don't need to worry about it because we'll take care of it. You just have to be honest with me. You have to fill out the forms I'm telling you need to fill out. And again, Article 1 of the Code of Ethics says what? I'm going to put my client's interest primary. And so to me, part of that means I don't want you to get sued. It's not in your best interest to get sued. And if we don't do these things that the legislature is telling us we have to do, a real possibility. Now, let me guide you through that process. To my way of thinking, when I get phone calls from people, and Cody and I get phone calls every day, I probably get a few more than he does. I'm telling people, now more than ever, you want to use a qualified realtor, right? Because if I'm sitting down with a Michelle or an Adam or a Joe Smith or somebody like that knows what they're doing, and I don't know you, Joe, but I'm hoping you know what you're doing. I think, right, if I have a minor medical problem, maybe I'll take care of it myself. But I had pneumonia at the beginning of all this, and let me tell you what, I was on the phone with my doctor every day. And she guided me through, because I was afraid pneumonia would lead to, because nobody really knew what was going on back in mid-February. And so I did not have COVID, by the way, I was tested. But I will tell you that to me, now more than ever, lawyers, realtors, good people that are qualified, that are keeping up, that are doing their job are more important than ever, not only because of the market conditions, which are severe, but because of lots of other factors. I mean, I have a couple of rental properties in Nashville, and I have a property manager. Why? Because he's better at it than I am. right? I mean, he just knows more. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I know the law, and I'm reading Tennessee law. It's really pretty interesting. But I just think that you go to a professional, right? You go to a professional. You don't self. So to me, I would use you simply because, and that's the selling. You're not overselling. You're not lying. You're not misleading. You're being honest, saying, look, you're dumb if you want to represent yourself, and here's why.
So John, on that note, and I saw a little bit of conversation in the chat then, a lot of these forms use the word guideline, but it's kind of implied in delivery that it's actual law. Is it a guideline then, or is it law?
Yes. It's called a guideline because that's what the state's calling it. Oh, thank you, Walter. It's called the Seller Non-Agency Agreement. That's the form, the I'm not your agent form, okay? Thanks, Walter, or Sandra, I'm not sure which. They are guidelines, but Gov made it pretty clear in my reading, and I don't know if Cody's had a chance to look at the actual COVID booklet from OSHA. I was able to have a little time to look at that. Upon which all these so-called guidelines is that it's pretty much mandatory. My attitude is this, look, if negligence is duty, breach, causation, and damages, that means that if you have a legal obligation to do something and you fall below the standard of care and that causes somebody to be harmed, damages meaning financially harmed, then why not do everything you can to prevent yourself from falling below the standard of care, right? I mean, so to me, I think you do these guidelines, or you keep our card handy and have enough money to cover your deductible, right? Because that's what's going to end up happening. Because I believe, and I could be wrong, and don't get me wrong, I mean, if I had a crystal ball right now, I'd be a really rich dude. But I believe that the plaintiff's bar is going to be out there in full force looking for lawsuits, right? You've seen these ADA drive-by guys, right? You've seen these discrimination drive-by guys, right? These employment lawyers who, hey, for a small fee, I will file your unemployment case or your employee wrongful termination case, even though there's no merit, because I know I'm going to get some money because the insurance company is going to settle. That's my biggest concern. I think that there's going to be a lot of defenses to this, but I also believe there's going to be some lawsuits. And because we don't know, I'm being even more conservative. Remember, we don't sue realtors, so we're always on your side of the table. And I believe more than ever, we need to be as conservative as we possibly can be. So it is 1:29. I will take one more question. Is there one more question?
Let's see. Yeah, let's go with this one. It's a little bit aimed at reopening practices. Essentially, they're just looking for some guidance on reopening to make it very general. I'm sorry for not making that more narrow, but I do know there's a lot of questions about it. So reopening practices, do you have any final comments on what brokerages should be doing, or brokers should be doing?
Rather than do that, let me do this. I have looked at what the employment lawyers, including you, have done. I think it's too much. I think it's way complicated. But I also think what you did this morning with the checklist that you gave me is fabulous. And so what I'm going to recommend to Connie, and hopefully she'll agree, or I'll send it to individuals, is that we put that checklist in a readable format. Number one, if you're going to reopen, which you're already, you wouldn't be here if you weren't trying to sell property. You got to adopt the BP, the best practices prevention plan. You got to do that, which means you got to read it, and then you got to customize it to your own office. Now, if you're not a broker, you leave it alone because it's your broker's job to do that for the office, okay? And then you acknowledge whatever he or she have done. If they've substantially revised it, downsized it, eliminated some stuff, be very careful about that. And if, but that's the first thing I would do is carefully review all of these, back to work practices. Then I would have some real clear guidelines. How many people are going to work remotely? What are going to be the rules for that? Most of us are working remotely right now. Some people may want to stay and work remotely. Hey, maybe I can't go back to work because I don't have any childcare, or this or that or the other thing. So I'll do that for you guys. Connie's been always been really great to me, and I really appreciate it. And I'm going to need to pay for a lot of vacations next year, so I'm going to have to work real hard. And I think that we should do that. And I thought my name's going to be on it. And for those that aren't on the call, will think I did it, and I'll take full credit for it because I'm the old lawyer. But I will tell you right now that Cody,
Nothing.
No, it's from Cody and from mine. I'll amend it a little bit. We'll get it out to you guys sooner than later. And then what we're going to have to keep doing is what CAR is doing is, I don't know how often we can do these because it's difficult to set these up, but periodically we're going to, at least through written material, get some information to you guys. We'll do a courtside newsletter on the new forms just so that you guys don't have to worry about that. We'll do some other stuff. But I got to tell you, in closing, and I don't, as you know, I'm not a particularly sensitive guy, but I will tell you that the people that are working for you guys right now, whether it's at the NAR level with federal, whether it's at the CAR level, particularly the GAD people and the lobbyists, but also the lawyers that are doing forms, they're working, and then especially at the local level, what Connie's done with your website and every day having programs that you can attend, take advantage of it. And for those of you that are cheap, shame on you, because right now government affairs is as important as it has ever been. And so Adam didn't ask me to say this, neither did Connie, but I'm going to say it anyway. Those of you that contribute to government affairs, yay for you. Because you know what? They're going to be spending it's an election year anyway, right? But it's an election year we've never been more divided, which means there's going to be all sorts of issues and that are going to be coming up both at the legislative level, at the local level. Fortunately, we've got pretty good people on our city councils, and so probably not so much for you guys as say in Orange County or Long Beach, where I've had to negotiate specific ordinances with the Long Beach city attorney. But you're going to have these issues, and these guys are going to be busy, and they need the money to do whatever they do. And again, that's my plug for GADS, because they're there protecting you guys and trying to rub the barnacles off of some of this nonsense that's coming down from the state. So be very careful. And keep an eye on what's going on at the legislature. It is unbelievable. All right. Thank you for showing up today, all 300 and some odd number of you. We've dwindled a little bit, but not too bad. I'm really proud of that. And really grateful for Connie letting me do this today. Mr. President, do you have anything you'd like to say before we sign off? Unmute yourself. Can you do that? There you go.
First of all, I had to get in front of my computer. But anyway, I would just like to, on behalf of everybody, thank you for your continued efforts on our behalf. You do a good job. And I also was very excited about the 300 plus people that got on here, because I was thinking about our normal brown bags, and they usually include about maybe 115 people in the Murrieta office and another 40 or 50 in the Hemet office and things. And so we probably got to about twice as many people via this Zoom. And no, it's a little different, and it's not quite as comfortable for us. It's still the way to get information out that we have right now. So I appreciate your efforts.
And I think that this is going to become, I agree with Adam. People that use the word new norm ought to be shot, but this is going to be part of what we do in the future. Whether I go live and we have a camera in the room for people to do Zoom, which we're looking at in some places, however we do it, it's going to be different. But it's not necessarily worse. I mean, right now I'm wearing shorts. I'm not saying I'm not wearing pants, but I don't have to get dressed up. I'm going to Ventura at the end of this week, and I don't have to go to Ventura. I can leave at 8:45, and I'll be there on time. So at 9 o'clock. So again, it really, there are some good things. It seems like the air is clearer. I just miss people. I really do. Personally, I'm a people person, and I miss human beings. I miss shaking. Well, may not ever get to shake another hand. Who knows? But I miss people. I miss stuff. I miss all the other things that could kill me. I really, but I do agree with you. This is a great medium for a shorter meeting, 2-3 hours. I tried doing an RPA class the other day. We had to cut an 8-hour class down to 4. That did not work. It can't be. I think 3 hours is max, personally. Just too long to sit, too long to pay attention to an ugly body on the screen. So, all right, kids, you have a wonderful rest of the day. I'm going to go take a drive. I've been going up to Julian, that's open. Great apple pies up there, which I really desperately need right now. So I would, if things are starting to open, go to restaurants, do things, start getting some of these people some of their money back. They're desperate need. The restaurant industry has taken it really, really hard. So have a lot of other industries. Go get a haircut. Adam, get a haircut.
Were you talking to me?
You're starting to look a lot like the president. I don't know, man. But do what you need to do, guys, and just stay well. And hopefully we'll all be released from house arrest pretty soon. So be well.
Thanks again, John.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you, John. Bye.
Thank you. Take care, kiddos.
John.
Bye, everybody. Thanks
Bye.
again.
Bye.
Hi, Wendy.
Hi, John.
Hi, Wendy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John. Bye.